Good evening, and welcome to Classical Theater. I'm your host, Kevin the Chicken. Tonight, we begin our series called Every Spell Put on Darren. Now, I'm not going to waste any time talking about the show Bewitched, because if you don't know what it is, you wouldn't be watching this in the first place. So this is the very first episode, and Samantha is sitting in a hotel room with when her mother appears, and Samantha's like, "Hey, I just got married." And the very first thing Endora does is start fucking with this guy. So the very first spell put on Darren is Endora zapping him from his hotel room into the hotel lobby. Now it's the very first episode. Darren's just there. Endora comes in. She doesn't know him. He doesn't know her. And the first thing she does just zaps him, right? He walks all the way back up to the room from the lobby and she zaps him again. Now there's a couple other things that happen in this episode where Sam is trying to convince Darren that she's a witch. She zaps drinks into his hand and lights a cigarette for him. I don't really count those things as casting a spell on him. Not all of the witches hated Darren. In episode 7, Samantha spends time with her aunts, Mary, Bertha, and Clara, and while we don't see them interact with Darren, they don't badmouth him either. The next time someone uses magic on Darren is in episode 10, called Just One Happy Family. It's the first appearance of Samantha's father, Maurice. Anyway, episode 10, Just One Happy Family. Maurice appears and he's furious that Darren is mortal. Samantha is completely taken by surprise. I mean, you'd think she could have anticipated. Eventually, she'd have to tell her father that she was married, but whatever. Now, to protect Darren from Maurice, Samantha locks him in a phone booth at one point, and Endora changes him into a newspaper. Why a newspaper? Why not a squirrel or a dog? We don't know. But Maurice unwittingly throws the newspaper in the fire, and Samantha retrieves him and turns him back. Darren stands up to Maurice, and Maurice zaps Darren into non-existent. Sam quickly talks Maurice into bringing Darren back. And it seems to take a lot more effort to bring him back than it took to zap him into nothing. In episode 11, Darren finds the perfect model for his ad campaign. But it turns out she's a witch named Janine, sent by Endora to test Darren's loyalty. But anyway, technically, the first time magic is used on Darren in this episode is when Samantha recognizes Janine and time freezes a whole restaurant full of people to confront her. So Samantha uses the magic on Darren, but it's a whole restaurant full of people. He just happens to be there. Later on, in her apartment, Janine puts a love spell on Darren. But Samantha intervenes, turning Darren into a fish. Then she turns him into another kind of fish. And then she turns him back into a human. Even though the character called herself Janine, Samantha called her Sarah. And when you look up this episode in the IMDb, it says Janine, aka Sarah. So, yeah. Now, moving on, there are several episodes where there's no magic put on Darren. But we did have this one little moment here.
Now, where's that nice mortal you're married to?
So, that's nice. In episode 19, Darren falls asleep on the couch, and Samantha teleports him up into his bed. Now, let me just tell y'all, when I think back to watching this show as a kid, it seemed like every other episode followed this same formula, okay? 1, Darren gets in an argument with Endora or Arthur or Serena, and then he storms out of the house. 2, Endora or Arthur or Serena says something ominous and then zaps themselves away, putting a spell on Darren that directly relates to whatever they were arguing about. 3, Darren goes about his day not suspecting that a spell has caused a fundamental change in the way that he functions. 4, hilarity ensues, of course. 5, Samantha makes Endora or Arthur or Serena take the spell off of Darren. This plot is so common that there was even a Far Side cartoon about it, and thinking about it is what made me even start these videos in the first place. So for reference, let's just call this the Far Side plot. The reason I bring this up now is because I'm up to episode 20, which is a variation on this plot, where Darren and Endora get into an argument. Endora makes an overt threat.
You're in trouble.
And Darren goes about his day as things start to go wrong for him. Now when he gets home, Darren and Samantha fight about it, and he conveniently, for me anyway, lists all the crap that happened to him that day. Sudden paralyzing inefficiency, being stuck in elevators, hiccup attacks, running out of gas. And at one point Samantha points out the futility of his paranoia.
The way you're talking, everything bad that happens to you now is witchcraft, right?
Now, most of the bad stuff that happened to him in this episode was the work of a co-worker who wanted to make Darren look bad. And it turns out that even with all the crap that happened to him that day, the only time magic is used on him in this episode is when Samantha wakes him up so that he can hear this guy's confession. Anyway, I make note of all this because the plot of this episode is the exact opposite of the Far Side plot. Darren doesn't even have a spell on him, but he walks around thinking that he does. And what's more, there hasn't even been an episode with the Far Side plot yet. In episode 22, Darren starts to worry about growing older while Samantha stays the same age. And just to twist the knife, Endora starts fucking with him again, once by making a wheelbarrow too heavy for him to lift, although it's not clear if the spell is on him or on the wheelbarrow. And then once by making him think that he's hearing squirrels talking. There were some other things that happened in this episode, like he got hit with a newspaper in his driveway, and all that seemed to make Darren feel like he was getting old. But it wasn't clear if those were Endora's doing or not. So I'm only counting the incidents where you actually see Endora doing it. In episode 25, there's a violent psychopath stalker looking for his girlfriend, and to protect Darren from a potentially fatal confrontation, Samantha turns him into an old woman. In episode 27, Clara accidentally hits Darren in the face with a cheese cracker. Episode 30 is another of the Endora puts their marriage to the test episodes. Here she brings back Samantha's old boyfriend George, who at one point turns Darren into a penguin, but then immediately changes him back. The weird thing about this to me is that George comes back and Darren is cool with it. I mean, it doesn't even come up again that George had turned him into a penguin. In episode 33, Endora and Samantha get in a conversation about Darren's looks. And while he's asleep, Endora changes his hair, and then his nose, and then Samantha gives him a mustache, and then she changes his hair again. Now Darren wakes up and he sees all the changes, and then Samantha changes him back. And while they don't make any more changes to him, this leaves Darren all self-conscious and insecure. Samantha then gets the idea to flirt with him as another woman to boost his ego. And while this isn't technically using magic on him, it is using magic to fool him, so I'm going to count this one. Samantha freezes Darren in time in episode 34 so that she can have a conversation with Endora. And we're finally at episode 36, the final episode of season 1. Cousin Edgar. Now Edgar doesn't even like the idea of Darren, and he does all kinds of shit just to fuck with him. First, he tickled him with a feather. Then he shut off the water while he was shaving. Then he sprayed him with a bunch of shaving cream. Then he turned the water off again. Then he turned the water off again. Then he bashed his head in with a mirror. He spilled hot coffee all over him. Tickled him while he was in a meeting with his boss. Tipped him over backwards in his chair. Made him write all over his boss's shirt with a piece of charcoal. Knocked him over into Larry in some kind of wrestling match. And then finally just tied his shoes together. So that's going to do it for season 1. There were 36 episodes and 39 different spells put on Darren. I made a little graph here to break down how many times each person who put a spell on Darren. You notice how big a piece of the pie Samantha has here. It occurred to me that I should break this down further between the spells that were meant to help or protect him versus the ones that were meant to harm or embarrass him. I combined Edgar, George, and Janine into one category here called cameos. You see the red there. Every single spell was meant to harm him except for the one time that George took the spell off of him. Maurice is even. He's put one spell on to send him into oblivion and one to bring him back. Clara's were all accidents. And Dora's were all negative except for the two where she changed his hair and his nose. And then the green one was where she was trying to protect him from Maurice. And then Samantha's, of course, are all either neutral or positive. So that gives you a better picture of how many times magic was used on Darren in the first season of Bewitched. So that's going to do it. Leave a comment below, click like, and I'll be your close personal friend. This has been Classical Theater with your host, Kevin the Chicken. All right, we're done here.